session on employee reward. What we're going to look at today specifically is the role of unions in the reward process. We'll be looking at a variety of different aspects of unions' influence on rewards, particularly thinking about the importance of rewards to unions and to consider some of the principal reward objectives that unions might be pursuing. We'll have a look at some of the particular impacts that unions might have on rewards, looking at issues, I suppose, obviously, on things like the level of rewards that are achieved where unions are involved, but also looking at some of the broader issues about the influence of rewards on the shape of a pay structure and upon particular pay practices, like particular kinds of incentive schemes like performance-related pay or merit pay, as it's sometimes termed. We'll have a look at some of the areas of potential disagreement and conflict over rewards, and again this will pick up on particular reward practices, but we'll also think about the potential contribution of unions to changing rewards systems as well, so to kind of balance those issues out. But we'll start off by just contextualising the issues around pay in relation to unions, and I suppose I couldn't do better than to think about this from the perspective that William Brown has set out in a variety of different articles, who talks about the centrality of pay for unions, really encapsulating the way in which the issues surrounding pay, and particularly bargaining over pay, are absolutely crucial, not just to the industrial relationship, generally to employment relations, but particularly for the role of collective labour. So for unions representing employees whose key objective in the employment relationship is about the payment that they receive for their work, for their labour, and the role of unions as the representatives of the workforce, that translates into pay becoming absolutely crucial aspect of the employment relationship. And so for unions, the role that they have in determining influence in bargaining over pay is absolutely crucial. That is the key thing that they're concerned about within the employment relationship. And so whatever our role in the employment relationship, it's important to recognise that those issues, the issues about the balance of effort and reward, of that bargain that's struck between employer and employees in terms of pay, in terms of employee rewards, that those things are absolutely crucial and central to the way in which unions see their role in the employment relationship. So, how does that translate into particular aspects and particular issues around rewards? And we can think about this by trying to identify particular aims of unions in respect of rewards. And there's an old quote here from a guy called Hawksey, going back to the early years of the 20th century. And he talks about union reward aims in very broad terms. And what he's talking about is about protecting the interests of employees, about preventing the lowering, and if possible, raising the wages of all of the members of the group, all of the members of the workforce. And this is a crucial element to recognise in terms of union activity in relation to rewards. Whereas management aims in respect of rewards is often about trying to make best use of the reward resources that they have available by targeting them at particular groups or particular individuals, people who make the most contribution to the organisation, people who are most valuable. From the union point of view, and the union is representing the broad group of employees, and so from their point of view, the key issue is to protect the economic interests of the whole group. to make sure that they aren't disadvantaged, that there isn't some kind of kind of balancing, pushing down the rewards of employees who may be seen as less valuable in order to reward more valuable employees more generously. That the aim of the unions and respective rewards is to try to maintain and enhance the rewards that are available to employees across the piece. So this broad approach, looking after the interests of the broad range of employees in an organisation, leads to particular kinds of strategies. And again, Huxley's talking about how this translates into union activity. Now, again, this is something that is sometimes misunderstood, that there isn't a real understanding about what it is that unions are trying to achieve and the way in which they try to achieve these particular objectives in rewards. And the key defining feature of the way in which unions approach the management of rewards is about maintaining control over rewards through the collective bargaining process, so that the union sits down as the bargaining agent for the whole workforce, or as much of the workforce as they are able to secure in membership, and to bargain across the piece with the employer in relation to rewards. And the reason why they do this is because of the particular market position of employees. That for most employees are in a fairly vulnerable position in relation to their employer. They're more or less dispensable. There are always other potential employees, always other people who can come in and do their work. And so the kind of opportunity for bargaining over wages at an individual level that employees have access to is fairly limited and leaves them in a fairly weak bargaining position. So in order to overcome that weakness, unions tend to stress collective aspirations. So this quote from Huxley again talks about how in order to prevent wages and conditions of the whole group sinking to the lowest common denominator, the lowest level that can be secured by an employee, then they need to band together. Now, what this is saying is that if employees attempt to simply rely on their own individual bargaining strength, they're going to end up in a kind of Dutch auction against each other. They need the work. Their ability to work is their only source of value, so they're in a very weak bargaining position. So effectively, they could always potentially undercut each other if they treat their bargaining process as an individual process. And so in order to avoid that kind of bargaining down to the bottom, the race to the bottom in terms and conditions, they have to group together. They have to make the strength of the weakest bargainer equal to the strength of the group, to bring up those weak members of the group up to the level of the strength of the whole group taken together. So in order to pursue these core objectives of unions, of enhancing the economic position of the whole group, they need to consistently increase the bargaining strength of the group by grouping together, by using that collective strength in order to enhance their position in relation to their employer. So this is why collective bargaining over wages and conditions, is such a central feature of what unions are about. This is why we see unions the world over engaging in collective bargaining, and why for over a century we've seen unions adopt this particular tactic, quite against the kinds of fashions that we've seen over recent years for contemporary reward approaches, which are about identifying people's market worth. For unions, that seemed to be entirely disadvantageous for employees, that because of their fundamental weakness in the relationship that they have with employers, that they need to avoid that situation. And the way to avoid that situation is to group together and bargain collectively, a single bargaining agent for the whole workforce, and bring up the strength of the weakest member of that workforce up to the level of the group. And by that way, they can protect the interests of the whole workforce. Just to stress in this, the last thing in this little opening section is about the centrality of pay, not just to unions but also to their members themselves. And there's a little bit of empirical data here which just indicates why this is something that unions concentrate on. Not just because it's a little hobby horse for themselves, but also because it's seen as an extremely important element of the employment relationship for employees as well. So a bit of research that Jeremy Waddington did back in the late 1990s, which was looking at the reasons why employees decided to join a union, they found that pay was the second most important reason that they might have had for joining. That this was, right up there amongst the very most important things that would make an employee decide whether or not to join a union. So it's a very important aspect of reasons why employees might group together in this way that I've been describing. The other side of this is to look at the reasons why there may be conflict in employment relationships. And if we look at some research that Matheson did at the turn of the century, found that dissatisfaction with pay was the overwhelming reason for industrial disputes in the period that they were looking at in terms of the data that they gathered. 2/3 of all industrial disputes, 2/3 of conflicts between employers and employees, between management and unions, were set off because of dissatisfaction with pay. So this is a really important issue. It's a really important issue for unions. It's a really important issue for union members, hence a really important issue for employees as a whole. So it's important to understand the strength of that feeling, strength of those motivations to be involved, to have an impact, to have an influence over rewards. And it's also very important to understand the kinds of influence that unions and employees are seeking to achieve over the design of reward systems. One of the key areas of interest that has been apparent in the design of reward systems over the past 20 years has been to focus very heavily upon the need for rewards to reflect the strategic objectives of the organisation. We've been talking an awful lot about this in other aspects of the programme. One of the issues that's kind of been left to one side, this is a point that Trevor made recently in an article, was about these kinds of concerns that exist in other parts of the organisation. That if we simply design our reward systems to reflect strategic objectives to the exclusion of understanding about the objectives that employees might be trying to achieve, the unions might be trying to achieve through rewards, then we're going to run into problems in terms of implementing our rewards in the first place, and also in terms of generating the kind of benefits that we might be seeking to achieve through our reward system, because so they may not be as motivational as we might assume, that they may generate conflict, that they may kind of become derailed in one way or another, because our focus is simply upon the kind of external strategic issues that the reward literature has suggested that we need to focus upon, and really hasn't been looking at the kinds of issues that are apparent from within the employment relationship. And it's important to remember that pay reflects the employment relationship. It's the key part of the employment relationship, certainly from the point of view of employees. It's the key issue, and we ignore it at our peril. So that's really what I want to look at for the rest of this session, to look at what it is that unions and their members might be looking for, the kind of objectives that they're trying to achieve and to see how it is that we can engage with unions in the design of reward systems and what kind of influence that might have. So, first thing that we're going to think about is to look at the influence of reward and the objectives that unions might have in terms of pay level, about the overall level of rewards that might be achieved, whether very high, very generous types of rewards, or whether it's about lower, less generous kinds of rewards. Now, the key thing that has traditionally been associated with unions and the level of pay that they might be seeking can be summed up in one word: more. And this is it's a quote, it's one word, which is associated with a guy called Samuel Gompers, an American trade unionist from the early years of the 20th century. More. What do unions want from reward? More. We want more. A bigger share, more generous. And that's all we really need to know about pay level. And this idea of unions constantly seeking more, constantly seeking a bigger share, has kind of come to exemplify that approach in a way which is really quite too simplistic and really doesn't explain the way that unions actually behave in terms of reward. But it does pick up on one particular aspect, which is about something called the union wage gap. Now, this is something that's been picked up by labour economists for a considerable amount of time, that there is a difference between the level of wages that's achieved in unionised workplaces and the kind of wages that are achieved in non-union organisations. Now, the level of the union wage gap, the extent of the difference between unionised pay and non-union pay has always been an issue of contention. It's difficult to measure, and people measure it in different ways. More fairly recent figures suggest that it might be somewhere around 8%. What is clear is that the union wage gap is in decline, and it's in decline for a number of different reasons. But explaining what that decline means that the difference between non-union pay and union pay is getting smaller and smaller. The extent of the gap, the difference that unions make to reward level, is getting smaller and smaller. Now, there may be a number of different reasons for that. Some of it might be explained by the next set of figures that we can see on this slide, which is that the size of the wage gap has always been much more extensive for certain types of employees rather than others. So for male manual workers, who have traditionally been the most strongly organised, most strongly unionised section of most modern economies, the wage gap is fairly big. Whereas for non-manual employees, which include administrative staff, service employees, professional staff, areas where unions have not either been as influential or where collective bargaining hasn't been as extensive, that wage gap is less apparent. Now, the reason why this might be significant to the overall decline in the size of the union wage gap is because of the change in structure of the workforce that we've seen over the last generation, certainly in the Western economies, with manual work, traditional male manual work declining at the expense of non-manual administrative, service, retail, professional, managerial roles where that union wage gap is less apparent. The other thing that we see between different parts of the workforce is that there is a really big effect of unions on female levels of pay. And this may be particularly apparent because women have traditionally, certainly since they began to enter the workforce in very large numbers from the 1980s onwards, been concentrated in relatively low levels of pay. So where unions have been able to organise women employees, and where they've been able to make sure that women are incorporated into more generous union negotiated pay structures, then that marks a very significant difference between those protected female employees and those that are stuck in very low pay and unprotected parts of the economy. And it's particularly apparent amongst full-time women workers. So, more. The union wage gap, the union wage premium as it's sometimes called, explains some of what unions' objectives have been with regard to pay levels in the design of rewards. But it doesn't explain everything. And so we've got this quote here from Ed Heary, who wrote quite an extensive article about the role of unions on rewards, part of a series of articles where he looked at the role of unions across a whole range of different features of rewards. And he's looking at a more complex picture than simply Gomper's insistence on more. And he's looking at the way in which union bargainers are more kind of multidimensional, I think is maybe the best way of describing it. That there are more issues at stake for union bargainers than simply about getting the best level of pay that they possibly can and hang the consequences. Because obviously, as we know from other aspects of the programme, there are trade-offs to be achieved. That if we raise the level of rewards, then that has an impact upon overall levels of employment. Now, unions are sensitive to this. Unions have to represent employees, and if union bargainers are going in and seeking to raise levels of pay at any expense, when the expense might be the jobs of their members, then they're not going to be accepted as effective bargaining agents for very long. And so this recognition that these trade-offs exist and that these trade-offs have to be carefully balanced is not lost on union bargainers. And so it's very clear that earning growth, more if you like, doesn't just get top billing in terms of the objectives of union negotiators, and particularly issues of employment are very, very important in terms of the decisions and the judgments that they make about how far they can push their bargaining hand, about how much they're able to extract from a particular negotiation with an organisation. And that if they feel that a level of pay is going to start cutting into levels of employment, then they're going to be very cautious about that. So the key issue for unions is about preserving the jobs of their existing members, and they'll very rarely seek to raise wages to extract the maximum they possibly can, particularly when a firm begins to fail. Now, obviously, we're talking about reward levels and other features of rewards being set as part of a bargaining process. And a bargaining process is about judgment. And sometimes it's a very difficult judgment call to know when an organisation, on either side of the negotiation, are being entirely honest about what is affordable, about what the impact of a pay increase is likely to be. But all of the things being equal, in the existence of good, firm information about the economic circumstances of an organisation, this point that Richard Freeman makes, that unions will not tend to risk the jobs of their members at the expense of pay increases. So we need to attenuate, we need to be a little bit more sophisticated than thinking that unions are just simply about maxing out on pay, hang the consequences. They make these careful judgments as best they're able, because it doesn't suit the interests of themselves, if they start losing members because their jobs are lost, and it doesn't suit the interests of their members if their jobs are lost by maxing out on pay level, pure and simple. So we need to remember that. In terms of other impacts of unions on reward design, it's one thing to think about pay level, but obviously one of the key issues that we're concerned about in the design of a reward system is about the overall structure of pay. Now, we've seen that unions are interested in enhancing the economic interests, the pay levels of their members within reason, and so to that extent, we see one effect of unions as being about stretching potentially the difference in levels of pay that might exist within a particular labour market or within an industry or within a sector. Because if a union is particularly strong in one organisation and they're able to push the pay level a little bit further, then that might increase the level of pay inequality between organisations through the union wage premium, the union wage gap that I talked about a few minutes ago. Within a particular organisation, we tend to see a different kind of effect, which is about compressing the pay structure. We tend to see the impact of unions upon the overall spread of pay within an organisation as being about reducing hierarchy, about increasing the level of equality within a pay structure. And that's for a variety of reasons. The first of those reasons is that unions have historically, across a variety of different areas of activity, attempted to limit the discretion that management are able to exercise over employees. So one of the issues within the way that any employment relationship functions is about the kind of boundaries of control, about what it is that managers are able to tell people to do and how much employees are able to resist being told what to do. And one of the functions of unions across the board is to limit the extent of management discretion, that they attempt to kind of push back the boundaries of control that managers have in order to provide a bigger space for employees to exercise some autonomy in how they operate at work. And this is apparent in the way in which reward systems develop under the influence of unions as well. If management have absolute discretion to award different levels of pay to different individuals according to their whim or their preference, then that's a huge degree of power that they are able to wield. And so as part of this general union strategy to remove management discretion, there is a desire to set some rules and set some frameworks and set some commonality over the levels of pay that exist at different levels in the organisation. And so one of the things that we tend to see unions doing is to establish a rate for the job, that every job, every single defined job in an organisation will have a rate of pay attached to it, and there'll be limited opportunity for managers to exercise discretion, to give somebody a little bit more or to give somebody a little bit less, depending on how they think they've performed or whether they like them or, for whatever reason they want. And this is about employees, through their union, exercising some control by limiting the control that managers have in respect of the amount of pay that might be available for one thing or another. So that's one reason why we see unions having an effect to compress pay structures. If management have lots of discretion, then we'll tend to see a wider range of rates of pay available. At the top end, with more generous amounts of pay being available to people that management particularly favour, and at the bottom end, lower rates of pay available to people who are not favoured by management. Regulating and controlling the amounts of pay that are available simply on the basis of the jobs that are done in the organisation has the effect of compressing, of pulling the overall levels of pay in within a more fixed range. And so that's one reason why we tend to see unions associated with a compression of pay within pay structures. The other reason why we see unions compressing pay structures is part of a broader philosophical approach that we see unions take. Again, the world over, this isn't something that's particular to a particular country or a particular culture, that unions have got this philosophical attachment to reducing inequality, and particularly to reducing low levels of pay. And maybe this goes back to the reasons why unions were formed in the first place, which were usually as a response to a sense of injustice, to people who were at the very bottom of the heap. Certainly for the new unions that were formed in Western Europe, certainly in the UK, in the 19th century, that this was about protecting people who were at the very bottom of the tree, and there's this aim to bring those people up, to lift people out of very low poverty levels of pay, and raising the floor at the bottom, unless there's a consequent lift at the top, will tend to compress the pay structures as well, create a lower overall range of pay that we might see within the organisation. Now, what this also points up is that unions' approach to reward design isn't simply about the more that Gompers was talking about, but there's a more complex layer of decision making that influences the objectives that unions might have in their approach towards rewards. And Ed Heary talks about this as a kind of moral purpose, that unions have got a moral agenda over rewards that goes beyond just looking for more. And he talks about two aspects of this, which we've already talked about a little bit, that this moral agenda is about fairness, it's about equality, about a rate for the job, so removing decisions about reward from the subjective discretion of managers, which may or may not be applied fairly, which may or may not be applied without due regard for the kind of prejudices that people might hold, but about rule-based decisions and about a common range of benefits for everybody within the organisation, so that people aren't discriminated against in terms of access to holiday or sick pay. That this is about fairness, that people are treated more equally than they might otherwise would be. It's about a moral agenda for fairness. The second form that this moral agenda takes has been about pursuing the interests of groups in the organisation that have traditionally been disadvantaged. And so here he talks about women and other atypical groups. Atypical, not because women are atypical, but because, I suppose, because they haven't, if we look at the historical presence of women in the workplace, haven't been the typical workers. But this might also be a whole range of other groups as well, of minority ethnic groups or people with disabilities, or all kinds of groups that have typically had a fairly rough deal in respect of reward. People who tend to exist at the bottom of pay structures, people who exist at the bottom of labour markets, and certainly since the early 1970s, unions have increasingly pursued, not always, but as a general rule, have tended to pursue the interests of these groups within reward systems, looking for greater levels of equality, looking for equal treatment between these groups and the more dominant groups within reward systems. So we see these two aspects of this moral agenda of rewards that Heery is talking about. Now, of course, the ability of unions to pursue these agendas effectively to make a real difference depends upon more than simply having that agenda. It depends upon their strength, and the strength of unions to make a difference in whatever kind of interest that they're pursuing tends to be dependent upon two things. Firstly, their level of membership within a particular workplace or across a particular industry. So, how much of the workforce do they represent? If they represent 10% of the workforce, then they're not going to have much of an impact. If they represent 90%, then they're going to have a much bigger influence because they control those labour markets to a much greater degree. The other issue that affects their ability to make a difference in this regard is about the product market conditions that organisations find themselves in. We talk about in another session, product markets determine everything. If you are operating in a very competitive product market, then the situation is going to be very tight in terms of rewards, and this is a limit to which even the strongest union can make a real difference without damaging the competitive position of the organisation that their members are employed by, hence having a knock-on effect on maybe employment levels and back to those issues that we talked about before. In more healthy product market conditions, then there's more scope for negotiation, there's more scope for change, more scope for generosity, more scope for bringing strength that might be apparent through high levels of membership into having an effect on actual reward conditions. Now, over recent years, we've seen the impact of more difficult product market conditions, particularly because of the growth of globalization, and more recently because of the recession, credit crunch, those kinds of things, and also because of in the 1980s and 1990s, decline of union membership and certainly very limited growth after that. So we've had unions in a relatively weak position to pursue their particular agenda. And indeed, perhaps as a consequence of that, we've seen increases of in inequality in reward systems. Even in unionised settings, we've seen reward systems tend to become less compressed rather than more as a result of a variety of different things, not least the situation that unions find themselves in and being limited in the extent to which they can pursue this particular moral agenda. But it's important to see where it is that unions are coming from. Sometimes we think about unions as being a bit of an awkward squad, that they are pursuing a harmful agenda. It's important to look at how unions see themselves and to see from their perspective that they're actually pursuing a highly moral agenda, something that goes back centuries for some unions, a long cause rooted in justice from their point of view. And if we're going to understand and engage properly with unions, we need to understand that this is where they see that they're coming from, and that this is the tradition that they see themselves standing within. That's required for us to understand and engage with them effectively. If we look at the